Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update. It's now the third video today. There's been a breaking news piece on Belgium refusing or rebuking the EU over the big 140 billion euro loan. We have Europe and allies possibly retaliating against Russia, certainly in the cyber domain. I did a video on that. Today, we're going to talk about hits and losses that have taken place across the front line. And we are going to be looking at a drone bomber map. Looks really exciting with regard to what may have been struck last night. It's my kind of map. And there is yet to be huge amounts of information, but it's coming out as we're speaking. I've just literally been looking at it a few seconds ago. It's emerging all the time, the information about those strikes. We've got desertion statistics coming out from Front Intelligence Insight, and we also have news of Andriy Yermak, the president's right man, Zelensky's right-hand man, sorry. His offices are being searched by the anti-corruption units. So lots going on. Let's get into it. But before we get there, if you haven't already liked, subscribed, and shared, and all that kind of stuff, really appreciate it. That's my obligatory statement I have to make every day to appease the YouTube gods. And I'll be sacrificing a couple of goats later as well, but don't tell anyone. Right, okay. Won't really. I like goats. They're fine. Let's get into it. We have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, of course. And those caveats, I think, can be found linked below. If they aren't yet, they will be. They disappeared for a short while. Okay, 1,100 personnel lost, as according to the Ukrainian General Staff figures in the day before, in the previous 24 hours. That is a fairly high number. Over 1,000, and we also have a high number of tanks and armored combat vehicles comparative to what we have seen, and a low number of automotive and fuel tanks. So a low number of vehicles and fuel tanks. Usually we see high numbers of those: motorcycles, buggies, SUVs, quads. High number of those if the Russians are attacking, because they don't seem to use combat assets anymore like infantry fighting vehicles and tanks so much. But then today we have 7 tanks and 15 armored combat vehicles and 1,100 personnel. So it looks like they have done some traditional attacks somewhere, maybe in the Huliaipole direction. I don't know. I'm sort of just speculating here. We understand that Russia is really struggling to make many gains in both Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. It's interesting that the pro-Russians, people like MK mapping and whatnot, saying Kupiansk has been lost, Pokrovsk has been lost, and you're like, yeah, not so sure actually. I think it's still holding. People are very critical of Syrskyi. They call him, you know, someone old Soviet mindset, sending people into these meat grinders and so on and so forth. But actually, I think the Ukrainians have done an exceptional job of holding on to Pokrovsk. It's been really hellish there. War is hell. Right, people are going to die. It is attritional, but I think that they have just about held on to it in a way that has frustrated Russia. Russia are piling in huge numbers of people there, and they are losing huge numbers of people. Apparently, we're going to come on to that in a second. Artillery systems, 21 of those have been lost. That's a fairly decent number for the Ukrainians in that category. 63 drones, a very low number of drones for halfway through last night and halfway through the night before. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that Ukraine has done something about the drone production capacity in Russia. They've been hitting all sorts of places over the weeks and months, and at some point I hope that's going to be biting. We've seen drone depots be targeted as well. Anyway, before we look at strikes and whatnot, let's talk about personnel issues. And Tatarigami here at Front Intelligence Insight has done some analysis on these desertions. Many cite desertion figures to point at a crisis in the Ukrainian army. Our team, Front Intelligence Insight, after consulting with mobilization officers and reviewing data, found that while desertions are high, the actual numbers are lower than quoted, which I find, you know, pretty interesting. Now we're going to look at the Substack article, but not in massive detail. It deserves its own video, really. Inside Ukraine's desertion crisis analysis and numbers. There's an interesting legal definitional difference between AWOL and desertion, where desertion is more about intent not to return. AWOL is just failed to return in the allotted time, and it could result in disciplinary action. It could just be, in practice, most AWOL cases fall under two common scenarios. The first is leaving the unit or duty post without approval. The second is failing to return from leave, medical treatment, or official travel on time. But it doesn't mean they intend not to come back at all. That's kind of desertion. The intent rather than the duration of the absence or the circumstances in which it happened is what separates the two crimes in the eyes of Ukrainian law. So they differentiate deserter and AWOL. A service member commits desertion when the absence is taken with the intention of not returning and of abandoning military service for good. So it's kind of like it's the deserter numbers that I think are the more important here. And you can see here from this graph that it looks really worrying. So when you look at that line just going up hugely, but that is the AWOL line going from 59,605 in 2024, in 2025 235,646. So a huge increase, but actually and the rate of increase is massive. But when you look at desertion, actually it's fairly consistent right across 22 to 24, 24 to 25. That line is fairly consistent. So they say this means that roughly 200,000 new cases were added in the 12 months after September 2024 alone. The trend points to a sharply worsening situation that accelerated over the past year, and if left unaddressed could lead to an eventual frontline collapse. At the same time, we should keep in mind that the number of cases is not the same as the number of people involved. That assumption produces an exaggerated and often catastrophic picture. In reality, the number of service members who went absent without leave is almost certainly about half the commonly cited case totals. So in other words, the same people can be doing the kind of AWOL thing, like going and then coming back and then being a bit late, rather than two cases meaning two people. It's two cases meaning one person. The distortion stems from how cases are recorded and counted, a point explained in detail in the following section. They say, although no high confidence nationwide figure exists, interviews and the limited unit level data point to a more realistic estimate of roughly 150,000 deserters combined. The number remains serious, but is far below the raw case count, frequently and incorrectly used as a proxy for the total number of missing service members. But, that's still a lot of people. So anyway, I can't read down to the end of this, but the takeaway point is that it's not as bad as people were saying. He talks about it there being, if they act now, they can get on top of this, but and it is bad, but it's not as bad as the worst case scenario that people often claim. Okay, so that is Front Intelligence Insight, but I'm not a paid up subscriber to the Substack, so I can't read on. Okay, on the personnel front as well, this is something I've been talking about virtually every day for the last couple of weeks, and it's been something that I think is a bigger problem for Ukraine than many people realize. Kenyan citizens are being captured en masse by the defense forces near Volchansk, according to one source. The sheer number of people that Russia are able to mobilize from around the world is a problem for Ukraine. These are people they have to capture or kill or deal with. They are fighting against just a huge number of foreign soldiers as the Russians really struggle to mobilize their own population. Now, going on, Syrskyi, who is criticized quite a lot by quite a number of people, he's not particularly popular in Ukraine. I don't know how much is PR and how much is the reality of his decision making. Some people say that Ukrainians throughout the war have decided to hold on to places longer than they really should have done. I think places like Bakhmut were broadly a success for Ukraine in terms of attritional ratio numbers. I think Bakhmut led to the death fairly directly of Prigozhin. It led to the mutiny and then the death of Prigozhin. Bakhmut was a success for a number of reasons, although it was hellish and there were a lot of Ukrainians who died, and some would say that Ukrainians just kept on hold of it for too long, and that may well be the case as well. And that could be the case with Pokrovsk. However, Pokrovsk is still holding. And I think the Ukrainians have done a pretty remarkable job of holding on to Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. It's particularly worrying in Huliaipole area further south from there. But even then, there are claims today that they've stabilized that front. I don't know how true that is. Syrskyi says that the Ukrainian forces have cleared 11.5 square kilometers of Russian positions near Pokrovsk, forcing Russians to deploy operational reserves into Pokrovsk and Murmansk areas due to Russian heavy losses. So that's a pretty substantial claim there from Syrskyi. Here we have Tim White saying Kiev has claimed for a couple of days that Russia's losses have been so heavy that they've been forced to move in reserves. Syrskyi says Russians are still disguising themselves as civilians there. So it could be that actually Ukraine has done a good job of holding on to Pokrovsk against all of the odds there. They need to fight somewhere, and they might as well fight somewhere where there are existing defenses, a place where it is clearly attritional for the Russians, at least according to the Ukrainians. Now, Scruffy Tales, the War Zone, has a channel, as I often advocate for, that looks at the frontline mapping. I have not done it for goodness knows how many weeks. I really need to do it today. But he, in his latest video, talks about how Ukraine is holding in Pokrovsk and the amount of land that Russia has taken off Ukraine. If you compare it to, say, World War II and other conflicts, Ukraine has actually really made it very difficult for the Russians to take land without huge losses. And the land that they have taken isn't huge like itself. So there is just an inverse correlation between losses and land taken. And the Ukrainians have just done a remarkable job, but it costs them and it's hellish, and they will have deserters and people going AWOL, because who wants to fight in a muddy trench line, getting constantly attacked by drones and shot at by Russians. So, it's difficult. War is hellish and difficult, but irrespective of that, the Ukrainians have done a remarkable job. Now, around Huliaipole, things have been a bit disastrous. The Russians have advanced much more quickly. Fog has played a part, and also coming along the defenses laterally rather than up against. So the Ukrainians originally built these defenses expecting attacks from the south, and that southern front line has stayed pretty consistent. And those defenses have done their job. But when the Russians are attacking, actually, you're looking at me, from the east over here, they're coming across the defensive lines, and so the defensive lines weren't designed to deal with that, and that's also partly why I think the Russians have had a lot of success down there. So Ukrainian unit withdrew in an uncoordinated manner near Huliaipole. Russian troops entered the flanks. Amid chaotic Ukrainian withdrawal, Russian forces reportedly execute another 5 POWs in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. And that's all reported by the Kyiv Independent. However, we then, first of all, meanwhile, near Zeleny High, yet another massacre of surrendered Ukrainian soldiers that was referenced earlier. And remember, those are only the ones captured on drone cameras. Deep State reports that 5 POWs were lined up, interrogated, and then murdered. And then, as White says, yet Trump and Witkoff still want to make grubby deals. Indeed, here is what I was referencing. Ukrainian soldiers have stabilized the front near Huliaipole and Zaporizhzhia, at least according to the 33rd Separate Assault Regiment, the ground forces, and other adjacent assault and mechanized units. They have restrained the offensive and regained control over the situation in that direction. I do wonder about some of this footage where the foliage looks very green, though it has to be said that does not look like autumnal footage. So it could be that that's just a generic piece of footage that's been found and used here, or it could be that some of those are evergreen trees. I don't know. Are there other trees that have no leaves on, as you can see around there? Possibly. But anyway, some claims that they have stabilized that area. I hope they have, because that's a real worry for the Ukrainians. Now, this is something that many of you and I talked about as soon as we first saw actually the Russians put these drone nets up across supply lines. Many of us said, well, just go and drop thermite along them from these sort of Dragonfire drones or whatever. The Ukrainians were using them at the time. Haven't seen so much use of them recently. Well, now we see a Russian FPV drone trying to burn down anti-drone nets over roads using thermite charges there. And I imagine that is a real headache for the Ukrainians, because they no doubt are going to have to go and patch up these huge holes that come about from such activity. So anyway, somebody did eventually take that on board, or decide to do that with these MSRs, with these GLOCs, ground lines of communication, or main supply routes that have been protected by anti-drone netting. During the evacuation of animals in Konstantinivka, Donetsk region, volunteers of the Animal Rescue Kharkiv organization became a taxi service for Ukrainian defenders. One of the soldiers jokingly said he'll be on air defense, and that's exactly what happened. So shooting down drones that were following them. These guys were saving animals, and they came across some Ukrainian soldiers that really needed to be. So there you go. These guys rescuing the animals as they were um, became an evacuation taxi for these troops as well. So good news all round there. Everyone doing a remarkable job. Okay. Then we have a fascinating image here of two chaps who were military medics. They were saved in Azovstal, who saved lives in Azovstal, but then they went into Russian captivity in May 2022, and they shared video footage, of them after 2 years of rehabilitation after being prisoners, where they were released. You can see, one chap there on the left looking very thin. Now he looks somewhat healthier, and then even more so with this guy here, who is now a bit of a beefcake. It's just, did they take that off my Facebook? No. Yeah, so incredible. I wonder how long it takes to bring you back to that kind of body. And obviously they say 2 years there, but I wonder how long it takes, kind of minimum, and also what psychological scars there are for these people. There are going to be so many people after the end of this war with psychological issues that will need so much therapy, as well as physical ones. My goodness! In fact, they were talking just yesterday. I think it was a Ukrainian parliamentarian. It might have been deputy prime minister. Or maybe the prime minister, actually, talking about how they need to have some kind of veterans bill, or veterans I guess structure to deal with the, quite frankly, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people after the war that are going to need assistance and provision. And then you've got, I assume, things like pensions, or it's going to be a very costly thing, isn't it? But that's the nature of war, and it's such a shame that this country never asked for that, and yet they're going to be bearing the scars of war for generations. We are going to go on to distant strikes now, and Ukraine was hit with 72 drones and one Iskander missile. Well, actually, that one Iskander did hit. Don't know where, but it was not intercepted. 63 drones were intercepted of the 72. It's not a bad interception rate, not too many drones sent. And I have very little information about what was struck, other than understanding in Zaporizhzhia, Russian drones have again attacked a fire and rescue unit. This might be FPV drones as opposed to one-way attack drones. The fire brigade's building and equipment suffered minor damage and no personnel were injured. So that at least is a good thing. But it's unconscionable that the Russians would continually try and strike emergency services. I mean, these are war crimes for sure. Now, the Russian army has begun to hunt Ukrainian aircraft with Shahed. So we talk about often Ukrainian helicopters being so effective in shooting down Shaheds, but now it's been found. Oh, I don't think I've got it. Do I have it? No, I don't. So yesterday, I think I might have it in my military aid one. Yesterday, there was a drone that was found with full on ability. So it had like Wi-Fi mesh on it and or some kind of communications mesh and camera. And the idea was this was totally able to act as an FPV drone, even though it's a big kind of Shahed drone or whatever it was. And then we hear here that the Russian army has begun to hunt Ukrainian aircraft with Shahed. So you can imagine you'd have a Russian Shahed drone flying into Ukrainian airspace. A helicopter mobilizes, flies to shoot it down, and then that drone is actually able to clock the helicopter and then maneuver itself and attack the helicopter itself. And so helicopters and planes are vulnerable now, it appears, vulnerable as a result of these drones able to attack them. As Deputy Minister of Defense Yuri Myronenko told Business Insider, the Russian occupiers are testing the possibility of intercepting Ukrainian planes and helicopters with Shaheds. I mean, this is an absolute, shocker. You really don't want that capability to evolve in these Shaheds. That complicates matters incredibly. Okay, I was super excited to see this map last night. I'll probably make it my thumbnail. The density of arrows there of drones, and in blue they are usually jet drones, I think, jet-powered drones. The density of these attacks must mean that there was some serious damage done last night. Crimea looks to have been under immense amounts of pressure, and possibly Novorossiysk as well. And then going up to, this is in the direction of Saratov, very much these drones, possibly, I don't know, Voronezh, Tambov, who knows. But Saratov, Engels there, possibly the oil refinery at Saratov, possibly. And then you got some maybe going in the direction of Volgograd and also Rostov. Taganrog, couple going down to Taganrog there. Not a huge amounts of battle damage assessment yet, but it is emerging. So a wave of explosions and drone. Thank you, Ivan. Good cup of tea in the Ukrainian mug as well. I'm going to have a sip of this just as a thanks. Oh, it's hot, as you would expect. A wave of explosions and drone alerts is sweeping across Russian-occupied Crimea and southern Russia tonight. Multiple blasts were reported near Saky. That's an airbase, military airbase in Crimea, and Novofedorivka as well in Crimea. Meanwhile, Russian air defenses are active in Taganrog, that's Rostov-on-Don, Novorossiysk, that's on the eastern Black Sea seaboard coastline, and Rostov-on-Don itself in Rostov Oblast. So Saratov, Engels, Saky, Novofedorivka, explosions, videos, but nothing too remarkable at the moment. Some grainy videos coming from a number of places. This one is from Smolensk, indicating strikes there. Then we have explosions in Saratov, and I think this is going to be where we might see hopefully some good news coming out today. Russian Telegram channels report a drone attack on Russian Saratov that lasted several hours and closed down the local airport. Locals reported explosions in the area of the local oil refinery and the military airfield there. Saratov oil refinery attacked overnight. Sorry, my mouse has just run out of battery, so I'm having to use my trackpad here. But you can see just in the background there, you have some explosions taking place. That looks like it was just above, so maybe air defense working, searchlights operating, and then I think, although this is spliced together video of all sorts of different videos. That's, yeah. So that's the one I want to just show you there. Quite a lot of fire in the background. I don't think I can, yeah, I can't. Oh, and that's evidently air defense working. But it looks like there's something at ground level, probably the oil refinery, that is on fire there. We have then videos coming from Taganrog, highly likely targeting the area of the Beriev aviation building plant again that was hit 2 days ago with those two big planes that were hit, and then the Molnia manufacturing facility was also hit in the same sort of area. So that was targeted, that kind of general area targeted last night. Then we hear that a 500 kilovolt Shakti substation located in Kiryevka in the Rostov region was attacked. It's a power flow point between Rostov power system, the central part of Southern Unified Energy System, and the Donbass and Voronezh region. So going back to the map, That's looking just at these few drones coming down here. That's likely a substation hit here, which connects, Voronezh up there and Luhansk, Donetsk, the energy system. So it could be a really important strike, that one. Yeah, I don't know that there's anything. No. Okay. So then occupied Luhansk was also under pressure from Ukrainian drones and or missiles. It looks like, air defense having success there, at least on one occasion. So we understand that Saratov oil refinery, drone storage site at Saky airfield, so that could be significant, and a number of other military facilities were hit, according to the general staff. So Saratov oil refinery and drone storage at Saky airfield in Novofedorivka. Several air defense assets were damaged at the airfield, apparently, according to the general staff, including a Pantsir S1 and the Tor M2 systems, a hangar storing hostile Orion and four-post drones. These are more like your Reaper MQ-9 drones, are bigger drones that can carry missiles rather than things like the Shahids. Or they often do reconnaissance. In addition, the enemy's command and control point and military cargo trucker commands will also strike areas of concentration of enemy personnel, and fuel and lubricant depots in Donetsk and Luhansk regions were also hit. Although we don't have any confirmation of that, the claims are pretty decent there from the general staff. Then we have Brovdi, Magyar, Robert Brovdi, coming out and saying Ukrainian unmanned systems forces struck 10 targets across Russia overnight, including Saratov oil refinery and power substations from Luhansk to Rostov, and with operations conducted by the first separate unmanned systems center and the Graf unit, according to Brovdi. So Saratov oil refinery, high voltage substations, Luhansk and Rostov. SBS's deep attack forces destroyed 10 objects of the occupiers' critical military and energy infrastructure with unlimited geography. I don't know quite what that phrase really means. Ukrainian general staff, though, going back to them, drone storage site at Saky airfield was hit. According to preliminary information, several air defense assets were damaged at the airfield, including a Pantsir S1 and Tor M2. Following the suppression of the enemy's air defense systems, a hangar storing Orion and four-posts was also destroyed. In addition, the enemy's command and control point, military cargo trucker commands were also struck. The extent of the damage is being assessed. So just repeating what's already been said, just to get a sense that, it could have been a good night for the Ukrainians, but there's still a lot of information to emerge. Then prior to that, so during the daytime yesterday, interestingly, the Rosgvardia Akhmat North Regiment was hit in Grozny in Chechnya, one presumes by drones. Otherwise, this is a sabotage bomb that looks fairly substantial. Strike drones, is the claim, hit the military base of the Russian National Guard's Akhmat North Regiment, located in the Byzangorov district of Grozny. Not for the first time Grozny has been targeted. We don't see it too often, though. So that happened yesterday. And then we hear this, and, I do wonder about people in positions of knowledge letting out what is happening to the general public, speaking here at a forum about the capabilities of a missile that you would have thought should remain under wraps. The Ukrainians seem to do this a lot, and then you think, well, there must be a reason then that they're doing this. They can't just be being sloppy, showing off. Surely there is a kind of a psyops reason that they'll be releasing this information. Anyway, once Ukraine has terrain maps of Russia, the Flamingo missile will fly at an altitude of 30 to 40 meters. No one will be able to see it from the ground, says Dennis Stilleman, co-owner and chief designer of Firepoint Company. That's an incredible claim. So he says, when we have the maps with accurate elevations, we will be able to avoid terrain features and perform map matching based on Turcom system, which has been in operation since the late 90s, he says. And then I'm just going to come on to later. It seems to be saying that quite slowly. Unfortunately, Ukraine currently does not have accurate terrain maps of the Russian Federation, which prevents it from avoiding terrain and flying based on the Turcom system. But the issue is being resolved very quickly by the military, and I hope that it will be resolved in the near future And we are very grateful for that, because everyone understands how important it is. And it's important not only for our missile, but for and regarding breakthrough effectiveness, if you saw how our missile was intercepted at an altitude of 114 meters, they already barely see it, he says. We are conducting tests, I won't say much, but at an altitude of 30 to 40 meters above the ground, no one will see it from the ground. The only chance is if there is an interceptor in the air with a new high quality radar, only then it can be seen. So the idea here is that if you want an interceptor drone to be effective, you obviously have to have already acquired the target. So something like a Shahed that is flying high, and this is why they sometimes fly Shaheds really low for this exact reason. If you fly a Shahed really high, then your radars on the ground that are going up in this kind of cone shape, if you like, can detect that, and you've got loads of time to get an interceptor up and take it down, because you are just seeing it go like that, and you're just looking at it the whole time as it's up there in the sky, looking at it with your radar. If you've got something pretty much at ground level that's just above your head, you don't see that until it is just there, and by the time you've gone, oh my goodness, it's over there, because it's gone like that, because it's much closer to you. If it's much further away from you, it's moving at the same speed, but you have it in your vision for a much longer time. And the same with radar. And so for these FP5 missiles, the Flamingo missiles, to fly using TERCOM, using terrain matching at 30 to 40 meters, is going to be super difficult to shoot these down. Super difficult. So he's effectively saying we're close to having invisible missiles that are going to fly really close to the ground. Now, of course, you can shoot these things down. For example, cruise missiles can be shot down when they're flying close to the ground, but it is difficult. Hope, fingers crossed, that he's going to be able to come up with the goods sooner rather than later. Okay, now across to other bits and pieces. All Ukrainian nuclear power plants are mostly back to full capacity. All the units, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, electricity production at the plants has largely resumed after Russian attacks on the energy sector. That's good news. Anti-corruption investigators have Syrskyi officers of Ukraine's unelected number 2. NABU confirms investigative actions at the head of President's office, Andriy Yermak. Wow. Details will follow, they say. So NABU and SAPO are conducting searches on the residence of the head of the President's office, Andriy Yermak, in the government quarter on the morning of the 28th. Yermak has said that, quote, there are no obstacles for the investigators. They were given full access to the apartment, and my lawyers are present on site, cooperating with law enforcement. I am providing full assistance from my side, he says. That's potentially highly controversial. The SPU has dismantled a Russian spy network that was preparing explosives caches for terror attacks in Western Ukraine. The group included a 20-year-old from Kharkiv and 2 teenagers from Rivne, all recruited via Telegram under the guise of courier work. They were caught early. That's really good news, but it just goes to show how easy it is for the Russians to get hold of people to do their dirty work, Ukrainians. Now, I don't know whether these people are aligned politically to Russia, or they just want some cheap money. And money goes a long way, doesn't it? Unfortunately, trumps morality so very often. Polish police have arrested a Russian citizen in Krakow for allegedly breaching corporate IT systems. Authorities accuse him of bypassing security to access databases. He's now in temporary detention. Just this hybrid warfare that's taking place all the time is, it does need addressing. Now, big news yesterday. Lots of people were talking about this. Russia has lost the ability to launch people into space for the first time in 60 years. At Baikonur, during preparation for a launch, a cabin under the launch structure collapsed. This is a movable platform from which the tall section of the rocket is serviced. Not looking in a good state there. The supposed superpower is collapsing right before our eyes. This is one of those things where anything negative for Russia is good for Ukraine. That's money that they have to spend. That's extra money they have to spend. They can't spend on the war, or it just stops their capabilities in some way. According to media reports today, a service cabin crashed at Baikonur Cosmodrome during launch towards the International Space Station. According to various sources, incident has left Russia unable to launch astronauts into space for the first time since 1961. It's unclear how long the repair will take. Then we hear that Russia turns to gold, as I've reported before, as its deficits surge, reversing decades of stockpiling, signaling the strain on its wartime finances. The Euromaidan press reports in an article, gold, once untouchable, becomes Russia's financial lifeline. Russia's central bank has begun selling gold from its reserves on the domestic market for the first time, marking a policy reversal as Moscow scrambles to cover a budget deficit that has ballooned to 20 times last year's level, according to Ukraine's foreign intelligence service. Now, I did report on this yesterday, I think, but there's more kind of meat to the bone here. Moscow's federal deficit has hit $48 billion in the first 10 months of 2025, a figure that was just 4.2 trillion rubles, and it was 0.2 trillion rubles. So it's an incredible increase there. During the same period last year, according to Russia's finance ministry data, oil and gas revenues collapsed 27% year on year in October, while the National Wealth Fund has shrunk from 113.5 billion in 2022 billion dollars to 51.6 billion dollars. So the National Wealth Fund, and that's what we know. I mean, that's going to be the best case scenario. It's probably more likely to be worse than that. Is a lot smaller than it was until 2025. Russia's central bank was buying gold and not selling it. The finance ministry would transfer gold to the central bank, building up reserves as a buffer against sanctions and currency shocks. The bullion never left state hands. Now the regulator is doing the opposite, conducting real sales to domestic banks, state companies and investment funds, citing the central bank's confirmation to Interfax. The scale is substantial. SZRU, the foreign intelligence estimates, gold sales could reach $30 billion, approximately 230 tons in 2025, at least $15 billion or 115 tons in 2026. Gold holdings within the National Wealth Fund have already dropped 57%, from 405.7 tons to 173.1 tons since February 2022, according to Ukrainian intelligence. Now, there are different numbers flying around. I've heard that there are 2,333 tons of gold. And so we need to be careful who we listen to and what we believe. But I think the general trend is important to note here, that they are selling gold, and that signifies that they are in financial trouble. The question is, how much gold have they got? Have they done a good job of stockpiling gold over the previous 3 years of the war? I just don't know. The gold sales allow Moscow to inject liquidity into the budget and prop up the ruble's exchange rate, but they come with costs that compound over time. Such large-scale monetization of reserves accelerates the depletion of stockpiles that are already under pressure from sanctions and declining available currency instruments, says the foreign intelligence. Russia's financial toolkit has been narrowing for months. The government has raised VAT to 22%, the second tax hike in a year, while regional budgets have been slashed by 4 trillion rubles, that's $49 billion. More than half of Russia's regions ran budget deficits in the first 9 months of this year. And defense spending continues to consume an outsized share of resources. Military and security outlays now account for 40% of Russia's federal budget. For Western policymakers tracking sanctions effectiveness, the gold sales offer a concrete metric. Reserves built over decades are now being liquidated to sustain current operations. Russia still holds over 2,300 tons of gold. That's what I'm saying. So the world's fifth largest reserves, worth approximately $200 billion at current prices. Moscow has shown adaptability, rerouting oil exports through shadow fleets in third countries to evade sanctions. So it's where that gold is. You've got National Wealth Fund. And is that separate then from the central bank, which is separate from all the other banks that hold their own reserves? Now, I'm under the impression that all the other banks, not the central bank, their reserves of gold have been cut by something like 46%, I think. So whichever way you look at it, Russia is selling off its gold. These different entities are doing so. Oil revenues are down, tax hikes squeeze businesses and consumers, regional governments compete for shrinking funds, and now gold that was accumulated for decades as a strategic buffer is being sold off to meet those immediate needs, says the Euromaidan press. Ukrainian intelligence described this fundamental trade-off. The gold sales strategy deepens the deficit of liquid reserves, makes state finances more dependent on asset sales, and limits opportunities for future interventions. The pattern resembles what economists Vladyuk described as Russia's narrowing options. The question is how long they will cover the budget deficit at the end of this year. Gold, long considered Russia's untouchable reserve, is now part of the answer. Wow. And then we have stunning collapse of Russian manufacturing data. According to Evgen Istrubin, October production year on year, tractors are down 47%, elevators down 35%, internal combustion engines down 42%, passenger cars down 47%, so on and so forth. It is difficult in Russia. But we do hear that Russian container ships, which previously delivered thousands of containers of ammunition to Russia, have begun arriving at North Korean ports again after a hiatus. So that's bad news. It could mean that more artillery ammunition and equipment is arriving from North Korea. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin openly stated, and I talked about this yesterday in a news update, that they are ready to fight to the last Ukrainian. He also insisted that Russia poses no threat to Europe and is ready to formally commit to non-aggression, a promise that history has shown to be worthless. Now, at the same time, we understand that, it's been 4 days since Ushakov transcript and phone call was released. And in that time, Witkoff has been confirmed in office, told he's off to Moscow, and has been strongly supported by Trump and Putin. Add 2 and 2 together, you get 4, which is to say that Trump and his administration appear to be fairly aligned to Russia, and there's no problem with Witkoff there. And then we hear that Ukraine has achieved the exclusion of amnesty from US peace plan, which this is very important. Stefan Nishina says, the Ukrainian ambassador to the US, that after a round of negotiations, the Ukrainian delegation managed to reach a number of principled agreements on a future peace agreement with Russia. So that amnesty for war crimes being taken out is super important. I think that is an absolute must. And we hear that Turkey's defense ministry says it's open to sending troops to Ukraine as part of an international mission. Its 3 conditions need to be met, though: a full ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, clearly defined peacekeeping mandate, and a fair division of responsibilities among participating nations. I think that's all fair enough. Right. Let's see if there are any last-minute emerging details of particularly strikes last night. No, just what we have seen. No. Viktor Orban is in Moscow, and he's not been given permission by the EU, or he's not let the EU know. He just went to Moscow, I think, with his foreign minister as well and others. So there is sort of groveling to Moscow from an EU and NATO member state. 500 kilovolt substations, Saky, that we heard about was struck. Claims about that again. But other than that, it's all about Orban in Russia by the looks of it. Novorossiysk, there's some more footage. Oh, goodness me. This is what I was talking about the other day. I'm going to show you this, and then we'll leave it there. But this is pretty incredible, isn't it? So you've got explosions. That looks like a strike on Novorossiysk. But it's just how low these air defense rounds are flying. My goodness, that looked like a ship has been hit there. I'm going to go back to the beginning here. Just look at these rounds just flying at goodness me, look, one just bounced right off near where I think this guy might be on a boat at the port. I mean, these drones are evidently flying very low, and they're firing at these drones very low. Just incredible there. And then an explosion looks like on a port, on the jetty, and then it looks like there's a ship on fire over there. So Novorossiysk could well have been badly hit last night, and we might see some footage coming out concerning that. I mean, this is pretty incredible footage of huge numbers of rounds being thrown into the air to try and shoot down those drones wherever they are. It almost looks like blind flailing. Oh, and another massive explosion just at the end there, very close to where your man is. That's on the port side. That's on the jetty just by the crane. So it looks like Novorossiysk was hit as well. Okay, final thing for you, though. Please remember to obviously like, subscribe, and share, and also hop along to atpgeo.com/donate. We are 3,185 dollars, into our into our project to raise money for the 80th Air Assault Brigade and ATVs there. So please help out us and Silicon Curtain, the two Jonathans here, in on this one. And actually, it's been added to another one. If you go and look at their projects, it actually is kind of added, I think, to quad bikes for the 80th. It's 32,000 gold there because it's been added to Toonie Tuesday that have already raised 10,660. So it depends which way you slice and dice it. But if you go to atpgeo.com, this is what you will. This is the landing page, and you can see how much that we have raised together. So please help out with that one. In the meantime, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips, tout le monde.